Since I was about 22, maybe 24 years old, I've been a huge fan of small business of all types, not just restaurants. I love reading about it. I've had my own business in the past for 6 years, a successful catering company. I'm familiar with all the ins and outs of what it takes to turn a profit. And I know the challenges that a lot of guys face when they decide to start a new business. And so since 2012, ever since arriving at the Philippines, I've gravitated, especially with just the vlogging that I've done, to getting to know the expat owners of various restaurants that I've been to over the years, many in Dumaguete, but also in other places. Now, there are some success stories here and there, but I'll just tell you here at the outset, they are the minority, especially if you're looking at a business that was started by an expat in the Philippines 3 years after they first had their grand opening. You might be familiar with some bars that have been owned for years by the same expat. For instance, there was a Marshall's Pub right there near Mango Square. Great little place. Cozy, did a really good Thanksgiving dinner every year that I would go to. I met the owner about maybe a year before he passed away, and that was when the restaurant ended. So you can say he did have a really good go of it. I don't know how many years he was in business, but I'm sure it was well over 8 years. And it was a very successful place. I was very close friends with Orville Henry, who did originally it was called True Love, the Jamaican restaurant there in Dumaguete. He ended up getting sued by the Marley Family Trust and had to change the name of the restaurant from One Love to Jamrock. But nonetheless, he kept going until he as well passed away, unfortunately, just a few years ago. But during the time that he ran his restaurant, I would say that it qualified as a success. Another very popular restaurant there in Dumaguete was owned by my friend Peter, called the Pasta King. It was the place to go to for good Italian food back when I was there around 2014. And by all appearances and standards, you could pretty much say, yeah, it was a successful restaurant, had a good steady clientele, pulling a profit. But here's where we go one layer deeper into this. When I'm talking about a successful restaurant, the definition of success is that you can keep the place open, do the payroll, cover your business costs. And if you're a small restaurant of maybe, let's just say 15 tables, if you can pull $2,000 a month profit, net profit, after all the smoke clears, you're doing pretty good. I had one restaurant owner that I sat down with him. He said that he was going to put the place up for sale, which he eventually did, because he pointed across the street at a little empty business suite. And he said, you know what? I could rent that business suite for less than $150 a month. I could outfit it with some shelves. I could buy bulk shoes from China, get them super cheap, and even selling them at a low price, I could make more money just having 2 girls work the store with none of the headaches that I have with the restaurant and make equal or more money. Because with the restaurant, you have spoilage, you have the occasional customer who simply refuses to pay for their meal, you have theft, you have a lot of issues to deal with. Employees that want an advance on their pay, you name it. A lot of stress. Now, speaking of small businesses, I have another friend, and he owned 3, now this was years ago, back in 2012, 2013. Out in Mindanao, he owned back then what was called a Pisonet. It was essentially an internet cafe, but it wasn't the kind of cafe where there's nice coffee and all that kind of thing. It was these computers that had a coin slot attached to it, and for usually about 10 pesos, a Filipino, usually it was Filipinos, could come in and use the internet for 30 minutes. So it wasn't anything fancy. It was usually anywhere from 5 to 10 machines on some desks. The kids would come in to do their homework. They get charged maybe 2 pesos to print something out. And then he would make a little side money selling bags of chips and cans of soda, that sort of thing. So he had 3 locations. And at each location, he had to have a CCTV camera so that he could watch them from his phone at any given time. And his daily routine was to go from one location to the next, spend about 3 hours at each. So that's about 9 hours plus commute time. And even though he had the employees, which was usually some, Filipina or Filipino, take stock of how many cans of soda there were, how many bags of chips, how many bags of peanuts, whatever. Even though he required them to maintain a list of how much stock went out and all that, he had to go and do the count himself as well. Because if he didn't, it was just a matter of high school kids rolling in, and the girl is simply, oh yeah, sure, here's some chips on the house. Don't worry about the can of soda. Oh, you need some credit to pay later. Sure, no problem. That's how it would go. So he had to manage these 3 locations every single day, 7 days a week. And eventually, he ran this for about 4 years. And eventually, he did the same thing. He sold it to another expat. And later, after he sold it, told me, I'm making more money on my Social Security disability doing nothing than I was making from all the money I was putting into these internet cafes and the amount of time that I was putting in having to keep up on them. And again, this is all in addition to the usual, you hire a Filipina, maybe she works for 8 days, she gets her first paycheck and you never see her again. Now he's got nobody to open it, he's got to hire somebody on the fly, just all the usual issues of running a small business. I remember reading on, I think it was one of the Reddit forums or maybe the Yahoo Expat forums back when I used to read those, about a certain bar out in Manila. I forget the name of it. Maybe some of you may know the name of it. But there's a big history behind it where essentially it's Filipino owned and it's a nice dance bar and music and all that usual kind of stuff. And he would put it up for sale, the Filipino. And back then, he would sell it with all the stock, the liquor, the license, everything for about $70,000, $80,000, which is a steal. A turnkey business for $80,000? What expat wouldn't froth at the mouth, who didn't know better, and lay their money down thinking, oh, this is going to be awesome. I'm going to move to the Philippines, buy this bar, that I'm going to be like Tom Cruise in Cocktail or Ted Danson on Cheers. I'm going to be out there behind the bar, having a great time, serving drinks, surrounded by pretty Filipinas as my staff. It'll be the happening place every Wednesday, Friday, Saturday night. It'll be a blast. Well, unless certain monies were paid to certain people, bars would find themselves raided or licenses didn't get renewed. So he paid the money. And then the amount of money required increased and increased and increased. And pretty soon he's paying out more money beyond his normal business expenses to the point where everybody else is making a profit more than he. So what does he do? He puts up his $80,000 investment bar for sale, hoping to recoup and find somebody else to buy it. And who do you think the first person in line was? The guy who sold it to him. But of course now he's like, well, I hear you're having some problems and, the reputation is damaged. It's not worth like what it used to be. I'll give it to you. I'll give you 80%, maybe 70% of the 80,000. And his back is up against the wall. So now the guy who originally sold it now owns it again. And you can imagine it's a rinse and repeat. The people in the forums were talking about the same bar being up for sale again, the third time in a row. Back in 2012, I started exploring Mactan and I went to the nearby Grand Mall, and upstairs there was this, what looked like it was going to be a restaurant. I took a look through the glass and I could see there was a bunch of restaurant equipment, but it was just like delivered there, like in the middle of the room. There were no booths yet. They weren't ready for business, not even close. and there was a big, thick chain on the doors. And I thought, well, that's strange. Don't they normally just lock it up like they do at the end of the day? Why put a big chain and padlock on it? And then after a few days, I came back, and because it was local to where I was, and I saw this notice. It was some kind of legal notice about foreclosure on loans and whatnot. So I started asking around the food court, as I got to know different people there. And I said, well, what's happening with this restaurant? Aren't they going to open? And essentially what they told me was that an expat had been brought in by some other local investors and told, hey, how would you like to own less than 50%, which, by the way, the law in the Philippines is that a business needs to be owned 60% or more by Filipinos. So a foreigner can own up to 40%. So they told me that this expat had put his money in along with these other Filipino owners, investors in the company to start this restaurant. And of course, lines of credit were started. Money was put into a business bank account. And before the place ever even hung up the first decoration, the other local owners basically emptied out the bank account, cashed in on all the cash credit they could, and walked away, which left the expat owning about 40% of that debt, along with the loss of the capital he put in, which is why now there was a big chain on the door preventing it from moving forward. I know another guy, a French guy. He purchased a restaurant and he thought to himself, well, the restaurant's doing good, but I'm going to really make it profitable. And he started making, now this was his own fault. He had never run a restaurant in his own country, let alone in a foreign country. He did not understand the market dynamics. So what he started doing was nickel and diming the entire restaurant once he owned it. Same price for a drink, but he used smaller glasses and filled them with ice. Same price for all the dinners, but smaller portions. Got rid of some of the specials that kept some of the regulars coming in. And you can imagine, he went about 2 years. I don't even know if he's still open or not, but when I left, the place was dead compared to how it used to be under the previous owner. I was recently looking at an article online, and I guess it was like a study done by Ohio State University, and their survey found that 61% of new restaurants fail within the first 3 years. Now, I've heard it thrown around that 90% of restaurants fail in the first year. But actually, and I'll see if I can find the links and put them there in the description, but another study done in Berkeley, they found that if we're just talking about the first year, the failure rate was actually only 17%, which means 83% were still in business. But like I said, that's the first year. After 3 years, you're looking at a 61% failure rate, which makes sense because a lot of businesses, they get a small business loan. And even though they're not surviving and keeping the doors open because of revenue from customers, they are able to keep the doors open because they're doing the payroll and doing all the expenses with no customers or very few, but they're doing it on the bank loan. Similar to people who have, say, $3,000 a month coming in, but they live a $5,000 a month lifestyle and put it on their credit card. Eventually, that runs out. And for most businesses in the US, or at least in Ohio, you're talking about a 61% failure rate after 3 years. Now, that's in the United States, where you have a big economy, people with spending money, which even that seems to be diminishing big time in the last 3 years. There's another guy that I follow, a vlogger, and he talks about how in Florida and Vegas, the restaurant industry is just imploding. And even the major franchises, like McDonald's and such, they've got people coming in that are only ordering off the kids' menu because the prices are just too out of control. Now, in the Philippines, one of the biggest gripes that I've heard from expats is this decision they have to make, and neither one is a good decision. On the one hand, they can make the restaurant that they've always dreamed of making. I've heard guys talk about, I've got the best Texas brisket recipe you ever had. It's going to be a hit in the Philippines. They'll never know what hit them. They're going to love this stuff. And the first thing, and this is usually guys that have never been here before or just came on vacation. And the first question I ask these guys is, where in the Philippines do you expect to get quality brisket? I go, you can go ahead and order it, import it, but now you're going to need to charge about $18 to pull a profit. I go, you really need to come here and understand how things work here financially. So one option is start a restaurant that is done the way you want to do it, all this great decor, a really good Western menu. Maybe it's going to be the best diner, hamburger, hot dog place, or maybe it's going to be an Italian restaurant. Maybe it's going to be Greek gyros. I knew a guy that started that. He was from Lebanon. And each guy said to himself, I'm going to make this restaurant my retirement dream. It's going to be awesome. Well, here's the problem. Number one, who is your clientele? Because the average Filipino, and we're talking average, cannot afford the prices you're going to have to charge to use quality ingredients. Even something as simple as a pizza. If you're going to use real cheese and not fake cheese, real cheese costs way more than the fake cheese. And if you're going to use real Italian sausage and not some knockoff, I've been to places, I'm not kidding. I've been to pizza places in the Philippines where basically they had a very plain crust. The sauce looked like it was painted on with a brush, mostly for the color effect. It had, I'm not kidding, it had lunch meat that had been cut up with scissors into little squares, sprinkled around. There's your pepperoni, which really was just lunch meat. And then it had some Velveeta cheese thrown on top. I had one that I ordered. It was so nasty. I took one bite and I was like, I know for a fact, I'm hungry. I just can't eat this. So I took both boxes down to the lobby and I left it there. And I thought maybe there's some other poor soul that this is going to be a treat for them. But this is, and I'm not a picky eater. I just could not eat it. It just was really that nasty. So either you're going to use quality ingredients, which are usually imported to the Philippines, and you're going to have to raise your prices to cover that cost. Or in order to compete with the local costs, you're going to have to basically drop your quality, drop your customer experience down to where you can match the guy who is oftentimes right across the street or right next door, and they might come in after you open your restaurant. I know one guy that this happened to. He had his restaurant open, and when he started doing well, at the suite right next to him, some locals, it was probably 10 feet by 16 feet for the space. And all they had was a freezer full of frozen pizzas from China, and they would heat them up in a convection oven on order. And they were selling pizzas right to the street for under 90 pesos. Right next door to the Italian place where he's trying to sell pizzas, quality pizzas, for $15. Now, you might say to yourself, well, you know, the market will acknowledge that I have a superior product. Well, again, take a look around. Most of the clientele walking around the street in your average Filipino town, we're not talking about tourist spots. We'll get to that in a minute. But in your average Filipino town, the clientele walking up and down the street does not have $15 to spend on a pizza. But they do have the equivalent of $1 or $1.50 for a small individual pizza that's maybe 6 inches diameter that was frozen 15 minutes ago. They've got money for that. I know another guy, and he was a Filipino, and he put his savings into starting, he built like a nipa hut. It was a nice one, a decent sized nipa place with enough room for about 3-4 tables. He had already gone to culinary school, and he was going to make the best Filipino food available and started this little resto. And once he got going and once people started coming to his restaurant, somebody started setting up just a table, no permit, no nothing, just a folding table and a little barbecue thing, and was basically leeching his customers away from him. And it didn't take long before he had to shut down. So to look at the whole landscape of being an expat, saying to yourself, yeah, I'm going to go down there. I'm going to open this restaurant I always wanted to have. I'm going to open up a Resto dance bar. My suggestion to you is if you're really hell-bent on doing this, live in the Philippines for 2 years before you even think of putting a dime into it. Learn how the dynamics work against you, not just in the usual business challenges, but on top of that, if you're going to run a quality place and your clientele is mainly going to be expats who have money in their pockets, your location means everything. And to get a location on Alona Beach or any other popular tourist area is going to cost you, even if you're just leasing it. And if you get a place that's maybe 2 blocks from the tourist areas, you're going to get less traffic. Sure, the lease will be a little cheaper, but you're not going to get as much foot traffic. And if you're going to go that other route and just sell a cheap product at a cheap price, well, now you're just one more guy, one more stall among the many that are out there doing the exact same thing. Now, like I said, there are some guys who have made it work, but they are in the minority. I'm talking about guys that are pulling a decent profit. Let's just say $4,000 a month or more, and they're still doing it 3 years after their grand opening. Those number of expats is very small. And the few that I can even think of were successful in their own country running a business before they ever came out here. So I hate to be a dream killer, but I also hate to see guys come out here, put their last 80 grand into running some business only to see it slowly die. So love to hear some of your experiences there in the comments.